Burnham, Chair of the Environmental Advisory Council in Wayne. And we're so glad to have Michael Wielbacher speak to us. He is a plethora of information on the natural and man-made environment in our immediate location. He is a writer naturalist. He travels the region offering lectures, walks, and other programs on nature and the environment. He shares information about everything from the life cycle of the monarch butterfly to how climate change will impact the Philadelphia region. And in fact, he has a presentation on climate change in the Delaware Valley that we're going to invite him to talk about in the spring. So look out for that notice. He is an adjunct at Villanova University and teaching about environmental education, and he leads nature walks in the area, offering one this weekend on fall wildflowers at Jenkins Arboretum, which is right up the road towards 202. Please visit his website at mikewielbacher.com for more information. You'll see his name appear on the slide if you want to know how to spell his name. I'm not going to try now. He is author of Wild Philly, a book featuring 29 nature walks you and your family can take in the region, plus tons of additional information about nature and the environment. In fact, on December 5th, he's going to present Wild Philly, the extraordinary nature of our backyard. So again, this is a very local area survey of wildlife that occurs right here in our county and perhaps right in our Wayne neighborhood. If you've ever noticed, the fall is the most interesting time for interesting activity on parts of animals as they get ready for winter. He's a resident of Lower Merion Township, and he served 8 years on the EAC in Lower Merion. And we greatly appreciate him speaking today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great to be here. Great to be here with you all in Radnor. Appreciate it. So we're going to talk about microplastics. I'll give you a primer on everything you need to know, much of which you probably don't want to know, but you're going to know it tonight. And now that you know it, it's going to be hard to unknow it. So I'm going to walk slowly through this. As Dan mentioned, I do have a website that has more information about me, so mikewielbacher.com is the website. And I do travel the region offering talks on things like monarch butterflies and their wonderful migration. If you see a monarch butterfly now, it's going to be heading south to Mexico, so they're on their way. They're starting. So monarch butterflies, and as he mentioned, climate change in Philadelphia. And I'm looking forward to coming back in the spring and sharing that with you, and lead nature walks across the region, and have published last year the book Wild Philly, which introduces the nature of the Philly region, has short biographies of the 101 species you should know if you live in the Philly area, and then 29 field trips you can take to places like Bowman's Hill Wildflower Preserve up north, Ridley Creek State Park down below us. So check those out. So we have a number of environmental issues that we're worried about these days, climate change being one of them. For me, I'm anticipating the debate tonight and wondering if climate change gets mentioned at all, and if it does, how long or short so I always keep a scorecard on whether climate change comes up in these, and I'm not expecting much, unfortunately. So climate change is one thing we're worrying about. The loss of the Earth's biological diversity is a second big environmental issue. Water resources in much of the planet are struggling. So we've got three big environmental issues that we're wrestling with globally. the last thing we need is another issue. But unfortunately, the science has begun to emerge about the importance of plastics in the environment and the impact of plastics on the environment. And we are at a pivotal moment in our understanding of plastics. So the science is coming out literally almost every day. In fact, a study that just was released only a month ago that I'll share in a few minutes. So if you start Googling microplastics, the algorithms will pay attention to that. You're going to get more and more information because the science is burgeoning right now. So we're at a pivotal moment. So this is a great time to be having this conversation, and you'll be, greatly informed as you learn more. So I want to begin to sort of walk gently into the topic of microplastics by going back to a study that was released 4 years ago in 2020, when a team of scientists looked at a number of really large, expansive wilderness areas, many of which were national parks. So they looked at Grand Canyon, and they looked at Joshua Tree, Bryce's Canyon in Utah. And what they did is they put trays of sediment out, and they just waited, and then they came back. So what they were looking for is whether microplastics might be in the sediments in these large wilderness areas. Now, this is one of their photographs. And you can see there's just, it's just sand. But then if you look more carefully, you can see, here we go, like this long blue thread here, a small blue thread here, then these round, almost like beads, red beads, and then these blue things here. Not natural. So what they discovered is microplastics were falling from the sky onto these big wilderness areas. And some of them are surprisingly small, right? So go back to college science. If you took, that's a micrometer, right? A millionth of a meter. So 500 micrometers is half of a millimeter. That's a bead that's just incredibly, incredibly tiny that they found. Wired magazine, if you've come across that, is one of the early adopters of the microplastic story. There's a writer there that I'll share with you, something that he wrote. He wrote a book on it as well. So Wired has become, oddly enough, the go-to magazine for information on microplastics. And there's their headline, "Plastic Rain is the New Acid Rain." So when this study was released, this is the journalists' compilation of the study. Researchers find that over 1,000 metric tons of microplastic fall on 11 protected areas in the U.S. nationally. That's equivalent to 120 million plastic bottles. 120 million plastic bottles, essentially, are raining down out of the sky on these large wilderness areas out west. And they're not alone. It's happening pretty much everywhere. So this is the study that got my attention and got me wanting to do a dive into the topic. So scientists began looking for microplastics elsewhere. And one study looked at 11 different sites on Mount Everest, and they found microplastics in all 11 sites. So at the highest part of the world, there's microplastics. Amazingly, the biggest amount, not surprisingly perhaps, the largest amount of microplastics were found at the base camp, right? And because they're all wearing plastic stuff and plastic tents and plastic tarps and plastic ropes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't that it was there, it was the volume. Can you picture a cubic foot, a foot by a foot by a foot? 4 million pieces of microplastics per cubic foot at the top of Mount Everest. I mean, that's just a crazy amount of microplastic. Now, that's not natural. That's because of all the climbers who were there using all those materials. So most of those plastics were polyester fibers. So what's up there? But then they looked in the Arctic Ocean, and surprisingly, in the sediments of the Arctic Ocean, there's microplastics there too, and weirdly, the levels there have been doubling every 23 years, and we're not sure why yet. But they seem to be concentrating in the Arctic Ocean, and we're not quite sure what the mechanism is for that, but they are increasing. In the Marianas Trench off the Philippines, 7 miles deep, this is the bottom of the Earth, right? If Mount Everest is the roof, Marianas Trench is the floor. This is the lowest part of the Earth. There's microplastics down there too. So essentially, everywhere they look, scientists are finding microplastics. And that's been a bit of a surprise. If you follow the plastic story, you might know a bit about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. You may have heard about this, and it's gone by other names, but it's a large patch. Patch is generous. Large patch of plastic debris floating in the ocean. It turns out now, if you, in the British-speaking, the English-speaking world of like Australia, etc., they like to use the word gyre. So you've got 5 of these gyres in the oceans, 2 in the Pacific, 2 in the Atlantic, 1 in the Indian. So the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is one of 5 gyres where essentially the currents create this situation where the plastic just goes round and around and around. And the Great Pacific one is the size of 3 Texases in width. So it's this huge mass of floating plastic. 75% of that plastic is discarded fishing gear. So that makes sense, or that if you think about it, that makes sense as a source. But that's only 75%. And much of it is from industrialized nations like US and China. So 25% is plastic washing in from elsewhere. Experts estimate there is 430 million tons of trash in the ocean, more than 51 trillion microplastic particles. This is unbelievable. A number that outnumbers the stars in the galaxy by a factor of 500. There are 500 times more microplastics in the ocean than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. All right? The ocean is expected to contain 1 ton of plastic for every 3 tons of fish by 2025. And by 2050, in 25 years, more plastics than fish by weight. There may be more plastics, right, by weight in the ocean than fish by the year 2050. Now, some big caveats to this. This study, or this number, has gotten a lot of press. And if you Google things about microplastics, you're going to find this all over the place. Scientists, many other scientists, are saying, hold on. That assumes that we know exactly how much plastic is in the ocean, and we may not. It also assumes we know exactly how much fish is in the ocean, and we may not. So we have to have those 2 numbers exact to get to that. But the point still holds that there's a lot of microplastic in the ocean, and it's growing. So there's that. An American sea captain 20 years ago was sailing through the gyre and around the gyre, and he coined the phrase plastic soup as his name for the ocean. And that name has caught on as one of the sort of nicknames of the ocean. It's become Plastic Soup. There's a Plastic Soup Foundation as a nonprofit that's formed to sort of address this issue. But there is this notion now that fish are swimming not through water, but through plastic soup. So if you're a whale shark, the world's largest fish, right, swimming through this plastic soup, and you see, well, a baggie, your assumption is that's going to be a jellyfish, which is one of your favorite foods, because everything transparent and floating in the water up until now has been jellyfish. So you're going to grab it. And of course, they can't digest it. And this has been compromising lots of animals. Sea turtles have a special craving for jellyfish. It's one of their favorite foods. So sea turtles are compromised by this as well. So floating plastics have been problematic for a number of organisms living in the sea because they can't tell plastic from not plastic. They're not, they didn't evolve to understand that there's inorganic things floating in the ocean that are going to harm you. If you've ever watched, or go back to Jacques Cousteau specials or even nature specials on PBS, and you see the cameras going through underwater, you always see what looks like snow, right? Because the lights hit this white stuff, right? So marine snow is the nickname for this organic debris that's constantly raining down in the ocean. So if you're a bottom feeder in the ocean, there are organisms who live on marine snow. They just sit down there and wait for stuff to fall down on them because gravity just keeps pulling stuff down. So a fish gets eaten up there, body parts begin to fall, other fish grab them and nibble at them, and it gets smaller and smaller, and then little pieces fall. So there's this continual rain of organic debris at the bottom of the ocean. Some of that debris, unfortunately, now is plastic too. So there's plastic mixed in with marine snow throughout the ocean. So another scientist grew some of these crustaceans, krill-like creatures, shrimp-like creatures in a laboratory and fed them, among other things, microplastics that glow under a certain light. And he was curious if they ingested them, and when he turned the lights on, there you go. So microplastics in the gullet of this crustacean that lives in the ocean. So the assumption is if it's happening in the laboratory and they're filter feeders, they're grabbing everything, chances are in the wild that's happening too. So if krill are absorbing microplastics, then whales, who eat thousands of krill every day, it's one of their most important food sources, are likely getting microplastics as well. Well, I wish I could say we were off the hook here in the Delaware Valley, but Penn Environment a few years back did a study of 53 different waterways across the state of Pennsylvania, and guess what they found? They found microplastics in every single body of water that they tested, including the Delaware and the Schuylkill and the Chamonix and the Wissahickon, and yeah, Darby Creek has microplastics in it too. So Darby Creek, flowing through Radnor Township, also was compromised by microplastics. So let's do some Plastics 101. That's how sort of everywhere they look, they've been finding microplastics. Now let's back up a little bit and figure out what microplastics are. And to do that, even let's remember what plastics themselves might be. And let's begin in 1967 when and possibly young Dustin Hoffman stars in this movie. If you're of a certain age, you probably remember it and probably remember this famous phrase from the movie, right? It was the highest grossing movie of 1967, just as an aside, but lost the Best Oscar trophy to In the Heat of the Night. Guess Who's Coming to Dinner was also up for, what a great year for movies, Dr. Dolittle. Anyway, so it's 1967, plastics are the one thing, right? So plastics then were just starting. And if you look at a chart of world plastic production and look for 1967, there's very little. So if you got in on the plastic game early in 1967, you did pretty well. But then look at the more than half of the plastic we've produced has been made since the year 2000 in the 21st century. So that's a little startling. We've been making plastics all of this time, and 56% of it comes to us in just the last 20 years. And then look at what the forecast may be as we move up into the next 30 years. Plastics are everywhere because they are so plastic. Right? In the original sense of the word, they're flexible, they're bendable. You can turn them into almost any shape you want, into almost any color you want, and they're cheap. Because we subsidize oil, and these are derived from fossil fuels, plastics are incredibly cheap. So plastics have been used in just a wide array of things. And you know, almost everything now is made out of plastic. And sadly, 40% of the plastics that we produce are made to be used once and tossed out. So it takes nature millions of years to cook the oil. We turn it into plastic, use it once, and it gets tossed aside. So almost half of our plastics are produced with the intention of single use, including those dreaded plastic shopping bags, the single-use bags, that there's been a big movement worldwide to get rid of these, but nonetheless, they're still with us. The average American uses 365 of these over the course of a year, exactly one every day. And there's 500 billion of them produced worldwide. So that's one of the places that we use lots of plastics. Of course, the ubiquitous water bottle is another. And here, there's 1.3 billion of these every day. That's 1 million every minute. And every second, 1,500 plastic water bottles are discarded somewhere on the planet. But plastics now are in the grocery store and supermarkets, right? Some supermarkets still have the fresh food just out like that. Happily, but others wrap everything in plastic. Plastics are used there. We wrap our meat in plastic. Guess what makes gum chewable? there's plastic in gum. Not just plastic, but plastic is one of the ingredients in most commercial chewing gums. So we're chewing plastic. It has played some life-saving roles. Plastic has been incredibly helpful in hospital situations where it saved them time and money, where things can be just disposed of, and that helps maintaining sterility. So there have been some better uses for plastic than others. Clothing, of course, has increasingly turned to plastic over the years to the extent that now 60% of what we wear contains plastic, mostly nylon, rayon, and polyester. Everything stretchable, flexible has plastics in it now. Outdoor furniture wears better if it's made out of plastic. It looks like wood, but much of it is plastic. Kids' toys are almost all universally plastic. There are some still wooden toys around, so kids are chewing on plastic toys. And our cars are increasingly plasticized, if that's a word. While plastic is only 8% of a car's weight, this has actually been a great trade-off in some ways, because plastic is by nature so light. The weight of cars has gone down, and that's helped with fuel efficiency. Fuel efficiency has gone up because cars weigh less, but 8% of a car's weight is plastic. However, half of it, the volume of a car, is plastic. So half of the space the car takes up, including most of the interior, is now plastic, unlike when some of us were kids. So cars are increasingly more plastic. And we keep finding more uses of plastics. If you're a fan of K-Cups, my apologies to you. But there are 12 billion of these single-use cups used annually just in the United States. 12 billion K-Cups annually, a number that would stretch around the earth 10 times. The number of K-Cups that Americans have disposed of would wrap around the earth 10 times. Oh my. Oh, Ian. Sorry, buddy. Let's see if this works. Ian was so great in helping me set up. I forgot to say we had to connect to the internet because this is in the cloud. So I went to Radnor Public. I think I'm in now. Is that good?
Did I give you a prompt?
It did not. It says no internet though.
Should bring you to a landing page that just prompts you to. There we go.
Got it. Sorry, didn't think to ask that.
No problem.
Thanks, Ian. We were about here, sound right? Okay. There we go. So that's where we use plastics. Now, if we're studying microplastics, you need to know what some of the terms might mean. So scientists have decided that a microplastic officially is any piece of plastic that is 5 millimeters or smaller. So, if we're going to use the term, we have to have some meaning to it. So small, 5 millimeters. Now, how big is 5 millimeters? Essentially, it's the size of a grain of rice. So a grain of rice or smaller becomes a microplastic. Anything bigger, they call it macroplastics. We don't have to worry about that. But when you hear the phrase microplastics, now you have a sense of what the scale is. And we do make microplastics. We do make them deliberately small, right? So when we use glitter glitter is the mainstay of every preschool teacher's art program, right? And how many of you have gotten Mother's Day, Father's Day cards covered in glitter or pasta glued to glitter? I mean, we just, every little kid does this. And unfortunately, that glitter goes right down the sink half the time. Guess where it goes after the sink? But we do make microplastics in some cases. This is a surprising form of microplastic that maybe only a few of you have heard of. I didn't until I started diving into this conversation. And these are the raw materials that most plastic products are made from. So if you make a plastic toy, if you're making plastic cloth, right? If you're making anything that comes from plastic, you're going to get shipped these. Tons and tons of these, and then you melt them down and turn them into the product you want. So this is the raw material. And it's probably one of the most important plastics you've never heard of. It goes by the wonderful name, I keep looking for it to pop up in crossword puzzles, it hasn't yet, nurdles. Nurdles are these little small pieces of plastic that are shipped around the world. The ocean has tankers that just have billions of nurdles going around, taking nurdles from A to B so that this company who makes it can send to that company who then turns it into a plastic product. So nurdles. But sadly, 230,000 tons of nurdles end up in the oceans every year. If a tanker goes over with a shipment of nurdles, the ocean is then full of nurdles. And can you imagine how many nurdles it takes to make 230,000 tons? They're tiny. It's the second largest source of microplastic pollutants in the ocean. Second largest source. And of course, what's the first? We'll hold that thought. We'll come back to that in a minute. The Guardian newspaper says nurdles are the worst toxic waste you've never heard of. You've probably never heard of, and that's a photograph of a container tanker that caught on fire and sank off the coast of Sri Lanka, and billions of nurdles washed up on shore over a very long period of time. So it's happened several times that nurdles have been involved in these kinds of accidents. So we make nurdles, we make glitter. Here's a third kind of microplastic, small beads that are placed in, especially like skin products as an exfoliant. They're called microbeads. This organization put this out, Face to Fish, because they're designed to be washed down the drain. But a tube of face wash can contain over 330,000 microbeads, and 1,100 personal cleaning products contain microbeads. It's an abrasive for your teeth, as good as an exfoliant. So microbeads are a third kind of primary microplastic that we make. I'm going to sidestep this for just 1 second and go back to this graph of the plastic that we produce worldwide. And remember that plastics are a petrochemical. They're made from fossil fuels, from oil. If the plastics industry was a nation, it would be the world's 5th largest in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So it would fit right between India and Russia, China and US, number 1 and 2. This is the amount that we put out annually. In terms of legacy carbon dioxide, the United States is far and away the champion in the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere from our work. China has a long way to go to catch up to legacy CO2, but this is how much is being put out annually. China now beats us. So by 2030, the plastic industry will produce more greenhouse gases than coal-fired power plants. So in the plastic conversation, there is a climate change angle to worry about here as well. Okay, so there's Plastics 101. Now let's figure out how microplastics get into the environment. Why are they raining out of the sky in wilderness areas? And let's go to the trash that each of us puts out, right? Sometimes the trash looks like this, and if plastic production has been growing exponentially, you can guess that plastic waste has been growing too. And you can see the blue indicates how much plastic trash is landfilled. The reddish is it says energy recovery, but that just means incinerated. And you can see, we try to recycle plastic, but we've never done a great job with it. So there's only a small amount of plastics that are recycled. Nonetheless, there's composting. We don't compost plastics yet. So There's plastic waste has been on the increase. The Boomerang Alliance of Australia put out this campaign, and I only put this slide up because of just a reminder that plastic does not go away. Sir David Attenborough, the star of the British naturalist who's been in many TV and movies about nature and the environment, said plastic is so permanent and so indestructible that when you've tossed it in the ocean or even into a dustbin, it does not go away. So plastic does not go away. It lasts for a very long time. And some of you have probably seen slides with various numbers like this. And if I go to different places, I'll see slightly different numbers, but nonetheless, you get a sense that plastic lasts forever. The cigarette filter lasts not as long as many others, only 10 years. Here, this styrofoam, they're saying lasts forever. I'm not sure anything lasts forever, but nonetheless, you get a sense that it's a very long time. And that plastic bottle we talked about already, 450 years. So what happens is plastic trash ends up in different places like waterways. And here in the water, it's exposed to the environment. Ultraviolet light, right, for example, is shining on it and begins to break it down. Fish nibble at it and maybe break it down. It goes through hot and cold, freeze and thaw, and that begins to break it down. Wind action, wave action. So in the environment, things begin to happen. It begins to break up. And as plastics break up in the environment, those become secondary microplastics. So the primary microplastics are the ones that we deliberately make. Small secondary microplastics are just, plastics that just get beat up and turn smaller and smaller and smaller. And they come to us in a number of ways. You've all seen places like this where, especially if you go along 95 through the city of Philadelphia, where trees have the plastic bags up in them and wind works on it and small pieces of plastic then shred out. In many places, if you have open air landfills, animals will get to it because it contains lots of fatty foods and sugary foods that they love too. And so they're ripping the plastic apart to get at the food, and you get microplastics forming that way. Amazingly enough, when trash is incinerated, sometimes there can be so much plastic material that some of the microplastics get up out through the chimney, so they're not completely burned. So microplastics actually leave incinerator smokestacks. And when people burn rubber like this, remember tires aren't really rubber anymore. Tires are an amalgam of many things. There might be a little bit of rubber in there, but a lot of plastic in there. So they're burning rubber. When you burn rubber, you're really burning plastic. And the big surprise is that tire dust, that's the largest source of microplastic pollution in the ocean. It's tires. Tire dust on roads washing into the ocean is the largest source of microplastic pollution in the ocean. So when that tire dust is in the ocean and through wave action, they can get launched into the sky and rain down later on in places like Grand Canyon. And remember, we talked about the local issues here, right? So we've got microplastics in our water too. How do they get here? So lots of different avenues. So just along any city street, as stuff gets washed into the storm drain, right? Many people think that storm drains somehow treat the water. They don't. Storm drains just go right to a creek. And all creeks in this area lead either to the Delaware or the Schuylkill, which goes to the Delaware Bay, right? But fertilizer, pesticide, motor oil, pet waste, leaves, detergents, all those things are going down the storm drain untreated into local creeks, and plastics go with them. So as plastics break up in places like that, scenes that look like this, those go down the storm drain as well and get broken up. Remember, we talked about bubble gum being made with microplastics, so that when you see this on the sidewalk and water rain goes over that, you're going to get microplastics from gum, believe it or not, in waterways. Every street, in this whole country is painted. It's not painted with paint made of nothing. The paint is made with plastics. There's plastic in the paint. And as that plastic paint corrodes and degrades and erodes away, it washes away. That's a big source. Also, lots of us wear plastic clothing, right? Or clothing made from plastic-derived materials. So when you wash that, guess what goes out the rinse water, right? Those small fibers are leaving, and you're hoping that they're getting treated at the waste treatment plant if it goes there, and some escape through that way. And when the dryer is doing its job, sometimes lint is blowing out the dryer, and you get microplastics getting launched into the atmosphere from our own homes because we're drying clothing that contains small pieces of plastic. Our furniture might have plastic material. Rugs are increasingly made of fabric that's plastic. So that's another source of microplastics because the dust now contains microplastic from these materials in our house. So household dust has microplastics in it. So if you look at microplastics in the environment, a third are from our clothing, almost 30% from car tires, amazingly, 24% from the stuff in city dust. So you can see lots of other things too, but those are the big three sources of microplastics in the environment. And remember, everywhere we look for microplastics, we find them. So as if all of this isn't hard enough, what's increasingly troublesome is that when everywhere we look in the human body, we're finding microplastics too. They're in us. Our hair, saliva, lungs, liver, breast milk, placenta. So the baby who's growing in the mother, whose placenta has microplastics, now has microplastics. We're defecating microplastics. What goes in has to come out. Kidney, colon, blood. So everywhere we look in the human body, we're also finding microplastics as well. And this is the study that just came out last month, the University of New Mexico. They found microplastic particles in our brain, a 50% increase since only 2016. And they don't know why. They don't know why that's gone up that much in that short a time. But microplastics are in our brain as well. People magazine took that and said a scary study was pretty alarming. So it is. And I don't expect humor from National Public Radio, who's usually more staid than this, but they did report on the same University of New Mexico found microplastics in testicles of the men that they tested. And so they have a little tongue-in-cheek reporting on that, but it's a serious study because male sperm count has been decreasing and no one knows why, and perhaps there's a link with microplastics. So now they're in us. How do they get there, right? A number of avenues. So we talked about those ubiquitous water bottles that are everywhere. One study looked at 94% of one study looked at a wide range of water bottles and found that 94% of the water bottle contained microplastic. So if there's microplastic floating in the water, we drink that, guess what? Many municipalities use PVC piping as water flows through that, right? It doesn't rust, but as water flows through it, it can pick up particles of the PVC. So when we turn on the tap in those municipalities, there's water, microplastics going into the water that they're drinking as well. So if it's in the water that people are drinking, then it's in the beer that's being made from that water. If you microwave in plastic, that's a huge source of microplastics, because think about it. You've got the meal itself is in plastic, and it's got that plastic across the top of it, that wrap over the top of it. So as that steams, steam is hot and highly reactive, so microplastics are going to slough off in the steam and fall into your food. So that's a source. And remember that we found microplastics in the plankton like krill and shrimp. Well, lots of animals eat those, including oysters, who are filter feeders. So we may be getting microplastics through seafood as well, like salmon, who are eating the krill, who are siphoning microplastics. But it's worse than that, because another study looked at a whole bunch of protein that we eat and found microplastics in 90% of what they tested. And if you think you can go vegetarian, there's even microplastics in tofu. And Beyond Burger, sadly, is not beyond microplastics. It's there too. So it's a challenge, right? So we do wrap our food in plastic, so microplastics can get in the food that way. But remember that it's falling out of the sky. So if you're a farmer, you've got microplastics raining down on your farm field. And if it's in the water and you're a farmer, right, feeding your animals or watering the plants, you're getting it that way. But a whole nother way is a number of decades ago, we began using human sludge, human waste, as a fertilizer. Dry the sludge, send it to farms, and then it would be sprayed on fields. Great way to use, to recycle sludge, right? Huge, really smart. But if we're defecating microplastics, then it's going to be in the sludge, then it's going to be on the farm fields. So we're essentially throwing microplastics, among other things, onto farm fields. And then lots of farmers are using this plastic mulching, which is great for a number of benefits: holds water, suppresses weed growth, increases fertilizer uptake, regulates the temperature. You can plant a little earlier because it's like a little greenhouse. But unfortunately, look at all the holes in that, so you're creating microplastics because the soil's in contact with the plastic, and then the plastic is also degrading around where those holes are punctured. So in the studies that they've done, they found the largest amounts of microplastics, small amounts, but among the largest in plant food are carrots, apples, and lettuce. Don't know why yet those three, but those are among the highest numbers. Remember those microbeads that we talked about a little while ago? So the facial scrub is now with microbeads, which goes into the sink, which comes out the pipe, which is now inside the fish, now with microbeads. So microbeads have been a problem. Many people have turned to sea salt because it's much more flavorful, right? Here's the bad news with sea salt. In much of the world, sea salt is made like this, where the salt is evaporating out of these shallow pools. But if microplastics are falling from the air, and if microplastics are in the water, guess what ends up in sea salt? So there's measurable amounts of microplastics in sea salt, if you like that. Crazy, but many tea companies spray the tea bag with a microplastic film so that when you make a cup of tea, you're leaching microplastics into your cup. So many tea companies do this. It keeps the bag together and it helps it from not splitting. But there you go. So we are eating more microplastics than we want to or than we know. So in 1 week, you're eating about a credit card's worth. In a month, about a Lego brick. In a year, a dinner plate of microplastics. 10 years, a lifesaver ring, and in a lifetime, you're eating the equivalent of 2 large recycling bins. Now, much of that leaves you right away, so that's how we're defecating microplastics. So it's not all staying inside you, but this is how it's getting into your body. Not all of it is leaving. Plastic baby bottles shed millions of particles of microplastics. Sadly, babies seem to have more microplastics in their bodies than adults do. Babies crawl across a carpet that is made from plastic fibers, and of course babies are licking everything, so they've got plastic fibers on their hands as they crawl, and in it goes. And as if all of this is not hard enough, scientists only 2 years ago detected what they now call nanoplastics in the human bloodstream. So microplastics are 1,000th of a meter. Nanoplastics are 1,000,000,000th of a meter. So now they're 1,000 times smaller than a microplastic, right? So these are pieces of microplastic. As the microplastic degrades, it becomes a nanoplastic. And a nanoplastic is roughly the size of a virus or a DNA molecule, so it can get through the whole body. It goes everywhere. So we have nanoplastic and microplastics inside us, unfortunately. So this slide has an overwhelming number of possible effects. There's research happening on this literally every day. We haven't made firm connections, but here are some of the guesses that scientists have, and they're doing work on this right now. So neurodevelopmentally, ADD, ADHD, autism, decreased IQ, cognitive deficits are among the possibilities. hormonal diseases, cardiovascular diseases, respiratory, male reproductive health impacts, female impacts as well, including endometriosis and delayed time to pregnancy, metabolic disorders, including diabetes and childhood weight gain, other health impacts you can see, and then pregnancy outcomes on the lower right, including possibility of lower birth weight. So there's a number of health issues that scientists worldwide are beginning to look at and to try to get to really nail down the link between microplastics and these issues. Which brings us to the last section. So what the heck do we do about this? So now that I've given you all of this information, now what do we do? And what do you do with that? So there's a number of possibilities, and happily, as I keep saying, there's lots of people working on this issue right now. But nonetheless, so what do we all do? You know, starting 30 years ago, people began to stop doing balloon launches, which is great. We still do them, but we don't do them as often as we used to because those balloons just go up into the sky and then come down in bodies of water or on land. And so this became problematic for our turtle, who thinks that that's a jellyfish, right? We got to get a little bit beyond that, but that's a good start. We also 30 years ago began clipping six-pack rings. So we began addressing some small pieces of the plastic puzzle. Lots of us now switch to more permanent water bottles. You know, I teach at a college, so all the kids walk in with a metal water bottle. Very few of them carry a plastic water bottle anymore, which is great. So that's a good step in the right direction. Many communities are banning the single-use shopping bag, including those states in green from California up the West Coast to New York along the Northeast, right? The purple states are the ones where municipalities have banned the single-use shopping bag. So you can see lots of municipalities across the country have done that, including Radnor Township, who did it a little while back. So congratulations for that. You're among the 10 municipalities in the state of Pennsylvania who have banned the single-use shopping bag. I believe Narberth Borough and Lower Merion have joined you as well. In addition to the plastic shopping bag, lots of work and discussion about the plastic forks that we give out all the time and straws, which is fine. These are, you know, the straws and forks are just the tip of the iceberg. Plastic bags are more significant. Costa Rica wants to be the first country to ban single-use plastics, which would be amazing if that begins to happen. So we'll follow that story. So just know that there's a lot of research being done all the time on this topic in lots of places around the world. In fact, University of Mexico that I've mentioned to at least in two of these studies, they're building a stainless steel laboratory, and the workers wear cotton clothing. So they want to make sure nobody can accidentally introduce microplastics into the laboratory. So they're going to be sort of the hothouse of microplastic research in this laboratory. For you and me, we have lots of reading and understanding to do. Two great books have come out in recent years, especially the one on the left, which is written by Matt Simon, who is the journalist who covers microplastics for Wired magazine. So he's the one that wrote the Plastic Rain is the New Acid Rain story, Matt Simon. So he's the leading journalist on the microplastic issue. So check out his book. For people like me, I have got lots of teaching to do in lots of different places to lots of different ages. If you're worried about food, the Washington Post, when it reported the study on the 90% of the proteins that were tested contained microplastics, they accompanied the article with this graph. And so this is an important, if you Google this, you'll get it too. But look at the top, breaded shrimp, oddly enough. The plant-based nugget. So the sort of the fake chicken nugget that's plant-based is number 2. Chicken nuggets are right behind it. Breaded stuff, fish sticks. Breaded stuff doesn't seem to do well on the microplastic side. But look at the bottom. So tofu does have it, but not as much. Pork chops, yay, and chicken breasts. So there you go. So there's the beginning of some of the kinds of things, some of the decisions you might make about food. The easiest thing to do is to microwave in glass. Just microwave in glass. That's like the easiest thing you can do starting tomorrow. Don't microwave in plastic, glass. Some sites are saying if you boil water for 5 minutes and then let it sit and cool and put it through a filter, you're going to get rid of 90+% of the microplastics that are in it. So if you are really motivated to tackle this issue, there's that approach too. I haven't done that yet. I'm thinking about it. Himalayan rock salt is kind of like sea salt, but it's never been exposed to the atmosphere. So Himalayan sea salt has no microplastics in it. And I love a good cup of tea. I make my own iced tea, and happily, I coincidentally use this company who does not spray their tea bags with wax. So you can do a Google search for those kinds of things too. So Twinings is my tea of choice. In fact, English breakfast is my favorite. Or loose tea has no microplastics in it either. Yes, we all should be recycling plastic, but that's a whole complicated story that's worthy of its own lecture, because it's hard to know if any of the plastics that we're recycling are in fact getting recycled, but nonetheless, some of you are shaking your head no. So that's become a big problem, not just worldwide. And the problem is there are too many different kinds of products, and only the first two, 1 and 2, PET, P-E-T-E, and HDPE are the ones that are really easily recyclable. The other ones are just not that easy to recycle. And number 7 is not really a kind of plastic. It's a grab bag of everybody else. It's et cetera. So this has become problematic. That there are just too many kinds of plastics that confuse too many people. Some municipalities take 1 and 2, but nothing else. Some take Accessa takes everything, 1 through 7. So in fact, here it is right here. And you've got the yes, we recycle A, B, and C. You can see under plastics, my pointer's not pointing at the screen very well. What's that? What's not true? They don't, what are they doing? They're dumping it, so, okay. So the comment here is that she spoke to the trash person who was saying that they don't really recycle the plastic. They're dumping it out with the other trash. So that's a question for your supervisor, for the EAC to look into. Yeah, that's a great topic. But what I know just is most people can't follow the requirements for plastic recycling because there's too many of them, and people are totally confused as to what you can and can't recycle. Some people think everything like bubble wrap or is recyclable, and so the plastic recycling becomes a hodgepodge of too many things, and so that's been one of the many problems with recycling plastic. Yeah. Is it true that only 5% can be recycled? I haven't seen that number. I think it's a little higher. The truth is, we'll come to this in 1 second, and let's hold that thought and make sure we'll come back to it. So I think it's a little higher, but you're onto something. Yes. Is this sign available for this sign is on I got it from the Radnor Township website this morning. So yes, it's available. Yeah. So there's the nose. No plastic wrap, no utensils, right? So that's the kind of thing people have a hard time. Well, why can't you take Tupperware? Of course, it's plastic. So there we go. So what's been happening is we've been sending these huge amounts of plastics in bales like this to third world countries, and they've stopped taking them. China famously took much of America's plastics to recycle, stopped. So there's been a real hiccup in plastic recycling, and the trick is, can we get that back on track now? So if you remember Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate, maybe you remember the Crying Indian public service announcement from around Earth Day 1970, widely considered one of the most famous public service, one of the best of all time, right? He sees that litter and begins to cry. The problem that Keep America Beautiful did is that they put the litter problem very successfully on you and me. It's up to you and me to solve litter. It's not up to the companies that make the single-use stuff to be thrown away. It's not their job to worry about it. It's our job. And we seem to have bought into that. And that's become problematic too, is the companies that make this stuff need to they got skin in the game. They should have skin in the game. So Coca-Cola is maybe coming around. As you can imagine, it's one of the world's largest users of plastics. That's 125 billion plastic bottles a year, about 4,000 each second, right? But look at the label. When you buy a Coke in a plastic bottle, it's made from recycled food-grade PET. So if Coke can pull this off, and this is really true, that's huge. So that's a big step forward. And they're responding to you. Essentially, consumers are demanding that plastic be recycled, and so that's the beginning of the response. And it's a good thing because the Plastic Soup Foundation accumulated data on all the stuff it picks up when they do cleanups, and they discovered Coke is number one of the 10 worst polluters, with 19,800 pieces of plastic from Coke bottles. In this study they conducted, Pepsi number two. So Coke and Pepsi still rivals number one and number two. Lots of activism on this issue, and you might decide whether you want to join in some of that activism led by Greenpeace and many other organizations. Some groups are wanting to ban bottled water in plastic bottles completely. So you can dive into that if you're interested. Remember those plastic microbeads we talked about a couple of times now? President Barack Obama in 2015 signed a bill that banned them from products in the United States. So it's been almost 10 years now that companies cannot use microbeads in American products. And we joined a number of countries in red, including Canada, India, China, right, the UK, New Zealand. So there's been a movement to get rid of microbeads in products. It's not worldwide yet. They're still being made, but there's been big progress on that front. Remember that Great Pacific Garbage Patch that we talked about at the beginning? One of my favorite nonprofits is this, actually it might not even be a nonprofit, but they're a startup called the Ocean Cleanup. Their goal, huge goal, remove 90% of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch by the year 2040, less than 20 years now. And they've invented this incredible system where they pull a big chunk of the garbage patch into their boat and then take it ashore to sort and recycle. And for a while, they were selling as sort of a way to break in sunglasses made from plastics from the Pacific Garbage Patch. They sold out really fast. They were incredibly popular. They're not doing it anymore, but that was just an attempt to get some publicity. It's a great idea, and they removed 500,000 football fields worth of plastic to make these sunglasses. So they're not only doing that, but the same ocean cleanup group has discovered that 90% of all plastic waste entering oceans come from just 10 rivers in Asia and Africa. You see the Nile River in Africa, and you see in Southeast Asia, trash is especially, plastic trash is especially a problem in Southeast Asia, especially in China. So what they've invented is they call it the interceptor. And this is at the mouth of a river, and it gets all the floating plastic at the mouth of a river and recycles it, takes it aboard and recycles it before it gets into the ocean. So they're just brilliant. Many, many nonprofits. I mentioned the Plastic Soup Foundation. So there are many nonprofits that you can support, so you can join and donate to help with that cause. Lots of companies organizing in Southeast Asia where this photograph is taken, in China where this photograph is taken about plastics. One of them is the Plastic Bank. This is also brilliant, where they set up a storefront, and somehow they are funded. And people bring plastic trash to them, and they pay you for it. So they're paying people to collect trash. So it's a great way. They're harvesting plastic and getting compensated for it, and the plastics are then recycled. So that's brilliant. And there are two game changers coming down the road, not fast enough, but coming quickly. And this is back to the question about plastic recycling. So much of plastic is downcycled, so that I have in my office a carpet from IKEA that was made from plastic soda bottles, which is great. Whoops, great until I discovered that my grandson shouldn't be on that carpet. But that plastic carpet, though I feel good about it, that can't be recycled. So we're downcycling it one more time. There are coats made from the fiberfill. The fiberfill is soda bottles too. Those coats cannot be recycled. So we get one more use, right? Classic recycling is like the glass bottle that's recycled and used, recycled and used, recycled and used. So we can't do that with plastic. So we downcycle plastic. That's the best we got. So if it's 5% or 10%, we're still only getting one more use out of it. But what they're working on right now is chemical recycling, where they can break the plastic into its constituent parts and then turn them essentially into other kinds of plastics. So if they can chemically recycle, that's a game changer. That'll be much better than the downcycling we're doing badly with right now. Question here.
Yeah, all these baby products that have, let's say, or bottles BPA free.
Yeah.
What, is that impacting children
Um,
in the same way as the non-BPA?
Yeah, BPA, so that's a whole different chemical that's kind of plastic adjacent. And there's also PFAS, the forever.
BPA or not BPA is still bad for children.
So,
And the carpet, I mean, and things like that.
right, so the problem is any plastic that the child is getting food from is going to have small pieces, small amounts of microplastics getting into the kid. So you're not going to,
Now they have these little pouches.
you're squeezing microplastics into the kid. Yeah, exactly. And it's so convenient. But a child's exposure, a young child's exposure is much higher than yours and mine, and their bodies are just growing. So hopefully chemical recycling comes up to speed fast. And then bioplastics are huge. This is another game changer where instead of making plastics from fossil fuels, let's make plastics from things like cornstarch and cellulose, which we used to make into a plastic-like material, vegetable fats, straw, wood chips. So let's make biodegradable plastic that we can use and then compost. Or when they're incinerated, they're not putting anything harmful into the atmosphere. So this is coming on as well. Mushrooms are making a huge moment in the culture right now, believe it or not. And mushrooms have these incredible mycelial threads that go through whole forests. But what they're able to do is, in a laboratory, they can grow mushrooms, grow a group of them, and have their mycelial threads form any shape you want them to, have them grow into a mold. So now you can make mushroom fiber packaging material, right? So you can send products in Amazon boxes out of mushrooms, right? And then it just biodegrades. And Amazon is working really hard, by the way, on some of its plastic. They're getting some religion on this issue a little bit. So mushrooms are coming on. In fact, they're even making mushroom leather now out of the mycelial threads. Stella McCartney, Paul's daughter, who's a fashion designer, is big on mushrooms and did a bustier and these sort of yoga pants. So mushrooms are having a really important moment right now. A couple of great books on mushrooms have come out recently too, so check those out. But nonetheless, if the graduate were done today, maybe mushrooms would be the word, not plastics. We're moving in a different direction, Dustin, happily. And in the Amazon rainforest, of all places, scientists found a bacteria that can eat plastic and needs very little oxygen. So if we can begin to cultivate that bacteria and put it, stick it on landfills, for example, that's going to be huge as well. So there's a lot of things, both high-tech and low-tech, that are happening all the time. Lots of people are organizing to stop plastic pollution. If you're inclined to want to join them, there's innumerable ways for you to do that. So though we do have climate change and biodiversity and the world's water to worry about, lots of people are working on the plastic issue. We do have a new environmental issue in front of us, and we want to take the oceans that currently look too much like this and restore them to looking something better, something like this. So that's a dive into the microplastic issue. I'll take your questions, and as I do, again, my website is mikewildbacker.com, and the book is Wild Philly. I'll be here in December talking about the book. So thank you so much. Questions? Yes. Any plastic that doesn't shed.
There is plastic that's now used for household plumbing
Right.
that I had done when I lived in Oregon because we used plastic really. But apparently it's been used in dialysis for years and years. PAX,
Yeah.
Because it's malleable, you don't need all the elbows and joints.
Right, so is there any plumbing that you can use that doesn't shed microplastics? None that I have come across yet, none that I am aware of.
Dialysis patients, then, would be a fabulous group to look at, because they would be packed with plastic.
And kidneys are one of the places that microplastics go, sadly enough, yeah. Okay, thank you, yeah. Did you have a question before? Okay, good, okay.
Yeah, I'm interested in hearing more about the human health impacts. I understand that research is still evolving on this, but what can we currently say, like, conclusively about the impacts of microplastics in the body and how seriously should we be taking it?
Yeah. So the question is how, what can we say conclusively about it? And yeah, so what I said is we're learning more every day. I'm not a health expert. I don't want to misspeak, and I don't want to overly alarm you more than I already have. What I can say with confidence is that there are not no health impacts from microplastics. We know that there's going to be some. We don't know which of these things are the ones. So there's been a lot of work on sperm counts declining, and a lot of wondering about that. Nobody's had a mechanism, so I'm sure someone's going to do a study on that. But then how microplastics interfere with a growing baby and the placenta and all that, a lot of work needs to be done on that as well. So no, I'm not in a position to say that with 100% confidence this is what's going on. It would be hard to believe that nothing is going on. Yeah. Yes. Okay, good.
Is water treatment at home advisable? RO machines, that kind of thing?
Yes, absolutely. Is water treatment at home advisable? I mean, yeah, there are all kinds of systems for treating water at home, and yes, they would begin to help. They might not remove everything, but they would begin to help. And if you boil first and then filter, you're going to be really close to getting all of it out. Yeah. Yes.
At this lecture presentation, you have it online somewhere, so if you wanted to refer to it, 'cause it's
Right. Will this presentation be online? So I believe the EAC is going to be putting this online. So somehow I don't know when that'll happen, but Ian's going to work on that. Yeah. I don't know how long it takes, but it's going to be up on the website.
It'll be on the township website under the EAC webpage. We have a lecture series webpage with previous presentations, and this will be included in it. The time frame, I'm not sure when, but I'd say within a week or so.
Environmental Advisory Council. Yeah. Yes.
I have one question. When you were talking about, I think you said it was a nonprofit company, and they were making sunglasses.
Yeah, the Ocean Cleanup is their name.
Why did they stop making?
I don't know their business model, and I don't know what they're doing. I know that the founder is impossibly young and incredibly savvy. So if you Google Ocean Cleanup, you'll get to see who the founder is, and there's lots of, especially YouTube videos. Wouldn't be surprised if he's done a TED Talk. But this kid, I think, is brilliant. I don't think he's even 30 yet. I don't know where he gets his funding from. I don't know what their business model is. But they did that as a test, and I'm not sure why they're not. I'm not sure why it's not a permanent product on their website. There are no products on their website that you can buy yet. So I don't know what their whole business model is, but it's really intriguing. One more question. Yes.
I just wanted to follow up on a question about the water treatment. You mentioned
Yes.
filtration.
Yes.
Would reverse osmosis remove microparticles? And then I guess follow-up, I have a countertop reverse osmosis unit, but it's made out of plastic.
Ah.
So is the fact that the water is just sitting in plastic an issue? Or do you think
Yes.
you have to go through a process of degradation and microwaving it in order for that?
How long is it sitting in water?
I mean, I might refill it twice a day.
Right.
What about the big?
And so the big cooler is going to have some microplastics leaching into it from those. I think the longer water sits in contact with the plastic, the more likely it is that some of the plastic is coming off into the water. So I would just, have it sitting in the water for the least amount of time you're able to. And I don't know about the cost benefit of of those two things, which outweighs the other, I don't know, unfortunately. So I really want to thank you all for coming. Thank you for your patience. I know this is a very difficult topic. I've given you a lot to think about. Good luck with all of that. But for me, it's very important information, and I want to make sure I got it to you. I want to thank Dan and the Environmental Advisory Council for having. I want to thank Radnor Township as well, and thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Michael. Just want to remind you that October 24th, the EAC lecture series continues with guidance on recycling in Radnor. A member of Republic Services who picks up our recycling will be here to give a presentation on that. October 24th. December 5th, we invite back Mike for a more Christmas time subject, which is the study of life in your own backyard. It may surprise you. Yes. Yeah. So thank you, Michael.
Thank you all.
You and I grew up without this crap.
Yeah.